Hello, and welcome to Pod Catalyst, a podcast dedicated to emerging trends and thought leadership within the communications profession. I'm Peter Finn, Executive Director of the International Association of Business Communicators, or IABC. For this episode, I spoke with Elizabeth Williams and Andrew Brown, both senior partners at the Academy of Business Communications, about their recent session at this year's World Conference, No More Town Hall Meetings and Other Evolutions in Leadership Communications. A little background on Elizabeth and Andrew. Elizabeth started out as a journalist, but soon learned the hours were better in corporate communications. She has since worked in the insurance, technology, advertising, telecommunications, logistics, cannabis, and financial services sectors, and a variety of senior communications, brand, and marketing roles. Prior to co-founding the Academy of Business Communications, she was head of brand and communications at ADP Canada. Andrew is a self-described organization junkie. He's been helping companies harness communications to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances for over 25 years. He's inspired teams of communication professionals while leading internal and external communications for complex multinational organizations. He has also served with agencies optimizing communications for top-tier clients. And as such, Andrew has honed the skills from his master's in managing organizational change across a wide range of industries. And it was a pleasure to speak with Elizabeth and Andrew about a really fascinating topic. I think all of us are no stranger to town hall meetings, so please enjoy. I am joined by Elizabeth and Andrew to talk a little bit about their session that they presented at World Conference, and I just want to welcome them to Pod Catalyst. And what we start with, first question with all of our guests is just tell us a little bit about yourself and also about your partnership at the Academy of Business Communications. So just a little background on that would be great.
Okay, well, I'll start. And thank you for having us, Peter. It's an honor to be here. I'm a longtime listener. And I got into the profession the old-fashioned way by failing utterly at journalism and going into corporate communications because you get to go home at night, which you do not necessarily when you work on a newspaper. And, I actually, one of the very first things I did that was smart was I joined IABC back in the 80s as a toddler. And I have to say, just not trying to blow smoke here, but for a very young, very new communicator who was the only person doing it in a large organization, IABC was just my anchor. And so I've been proud to be part of the organization for 100,000 years. And I got to volunteer on the foundation fundraising committee. And this was my second World Conference speaking. And so it's just such a great organization. So proud to be here.
And for my part, my background was change management. And like Elizabeth, when I started in the world of communications, there were a few organizations out there that actually dealt with any kind of change or facilitation skills, and IBC led the charge. So for the past 25 plus years, I've been helping companies harness communications so that they can adapt to change. And that's taken me through a whole bunch of different industries in the public and private sector. And we were fortunate to be connected by a member of a common person in our network. And we launched ABC because there does remain a perception that employee comms folks really, make things nice and publish stuff. And we saw employee communications professionals stuck on what we call a treadmill of pointlessness, frustrated and often overwhelmed. And since we made that transition to the executive table, we really wanted to help others do the same thing. So our consulting, our training, we provide those skills, the processes, the assets, so that employee comms folks can really make contributions that make their organizations wildly successful.
Thank you. And I found your topic fascinating because also just personally, because I've participated in many, many town halls. I've had to lead town halls. So, the idea that no more town halls or what we can do differently, I'm all ears. So can you talk a little bit more about, and I'm sure some of this comes out of research and some of the work that you've done in the past, but what was sort of the spark for this, and what are you recommending, and what are you seeing, and how organizations can involve and have better engagement?
Sure, that's a meaty subject. Let me start first with the premise that we had that town halls are broken, and let's be clear what we mean when we say that. We're not talking about when technology doesn't work and people can't see or hear the presenter, or where, the PowerPoint slides are illegible. We're also not saying that the intention of bringing together people from across your organization is flawed or misguided, but rather, before condemning a communications tool so widely used as town halls as being broken, we looked at the outcomes. So let's just think of a quick analogy. Let's say you bake cookies in your microwave and they're going to come out fast, but they're going to taste terrible. Maybe it's not the right tool for you, given what you're hoping to achieve. So you're not going to get those very yummy chocolate chip gooey cookies. So over the last 18 plus months, we had discussions with members of our Fearless Communicators community, company senior executives, middle managers, employees on the front line, and we spoke with representatives from HR and customer success, marketing, finance, and operations as well. And what we consistently heard and observed was that people were leaving town halls unfocused, uninspired, and feeling cheated, sometimes even irritated. So just think about that for a moment. Listeners of your podcast know all too well the hard work, the hopes, the aspirations that go into pulling together a town hall. And yet the audience is feeling cheated. What a lost opportunity. Something was terribly wrong. We also found that town halls are indeed well-intentioned. I want to emphasize that. But they're also done out of habit and without a focus on goals that are really appropriate to large group presentations. It reminded me of when email started out as a communication tool. Marketers would pick up everything they did with the direct mailers and just drop them in their entirety, text, graphics, tone, everything, into an email. And there was that time where there was that sort of medium blindness where people hadn't really built a mastery over how to use the strengths and weaknesses of the medium. And we found the same is true about town halls.
And let's not forget that they are boring, time-sucking, irrelevant, mostly expensive, kind of terrifying, inefficient acts of leadership theater. I mean, let's just be, it's also just, they suck, really. They've hit bottom.
And so as sort of your recommendation for what organizations can do as sort of an alternative or an evolution of that, but what are you proposing and what are you seeing where organizations are, succeeding and kind of taking a more evolved approach?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that actually, because I was worried somebody would ask me at our presentation for an example, and I was struggling to find companies that have, I think, evolved town halls away from what they are. But one of the things I think the pandemic helped some CEOs do, of course, is break that habit, because you can't just jump on a plane and go talk to people for 2.5 hours and serve them terrible coffee and leave. And a couple of things that I've been seeing CEOs do that I think are wonderful alternatives or complements to terrible town halls is AMAs, Ask Me Anything. And so I would check out the CEO of Cengage. The CEO of Zendesk also got right on those early in the pandemic. And an AMA is basically just ask me anything. And it can be as simple as opening a conference bridge or a Zoom and just inviting employees to come in and talk. And they're a wonderful way to build trust. They're a wonderful way to listen, because town halls are terrible at listening. CEOs like to believe that when they go out on a town hall, they're actually listening, and mostly they're just talking and giving people 5 minutes to ask canned questions at the end. And so AMAs are, I think, one of the evolutions of that kind of conversation with your employees. And I hope maybe one of the other things that comes out of the pandemic is an understanding that a town hall only succeeds if you've got partnerships at that grassroots level. So you can blow into town like an invading army, but if you don't have the frontline managers in that location and the leadership team in that location, kind of what we call inside the tent, so they know what you're going to say, then you're creating at the very least some points of resistance, because they don't know what's coming either. And I think that that's one of the other evolutions, is making it much more of a team effort and involving local managers and local leaders. And I guess the one example I can sort of think of evolved thinking around a town hall is it's actually pre-pandemic, and it's this mid-sized bank and new CEO coming from outside the industry, no clue how banking works. And when he arrived, and I was there that first week, I was doing some consulting with their comms team. They had already booked his roadshow, his town hall roadshow, for 3 weeks after he got there. And he's just looking at this going, I don't know where the bathroom is. How can I possibly go out and talk to thousands of people in cities across the country? And why are we doing this anyway? And it was that interesting question, why are we doing this? And I don't think that anyone on that comms team had ever actually thought, yeah, why are we doing this? It was just all about the logistics of trying to move this. And so they had this whole roadshow plan. I think it was like 7 or 8 cities. They were taking the entire leadership team, right? So the whole circus was coming to town. And with his sort of, permission, we canceled it. We eventually did it, but we spent a lot of time thinking very hard about what this should be and what he was going to do with it. And he basically ended up going out with just one other executive. He made the rest of them stay home. And he did a very tight 30-minute strategy session. Here's my vision for this bank for the next 2 years. And then he spent 30 minutes with his mouth shut and his ears open. And it was great. The employees loved it. They'd never had that kind of interaction before. And I have been meaning to phone and see if they're still doing it that way. But, that would be just one evolutionary step, is ask why. What is it that we're trying to do here? And are we really leveraging what town halls do extremely well?
And I just add to that that example served as how town halls can morph beyond what the original intention was. And then they can become these big, unwieldy, throw everything at the wall and see what is stick events. And as a result, you've got a whole bunch of agendas going on, and who loses out? Well, turns out everyone within the organization, the executives, the comms team, the employees, everyone walks away feeling, again, confused, not focused, irritated, and unsatisfied, and not connected to the organization, which is often where town hall planning begins. Hey, let's get everyone to rally around. Let's get people excited. And yet, you throw all the stuff at it, and that gets diffused and essentially flushed out.
Yeah, the technical term for that is might as well-itis, right? Yes. So we're going out on the road. We might as well bring the HR people, and we might as well bring the product people. And you end up with what we call a sort of a turducken of content. And it's about as much fun as eating a turducken at the end of the day.
So I was curious as what you say to CEOs and how they're conducting these town halls. So kind of coaching them on how to really engage with those that are in attendance. So whether it be employees or in my case, for an association with members. So they're authentic. And I think, what we noted earlier, that they really appear to be listening, because that's, really a big point of or purpose of town halls. But just curious to get your thoughts on that. I mean, how you're advising the individuals that are leading these town halls.
Well, I'll jump in with a few things, and I'm going to pick up on the listening element. And in developing a town hall, as well as giving the town hall, those are opportunities to listen. And certainly do not hold a town hall. In fact, if you're thinking about holding a town hall and you haven't engaged your frontline manager, just stop dead right now. Don't do it, because you can't have an effective town hall without getting those people involved. And so that's on the delivery of the town hall, but also in the development of it. It's a great opportunity to float ideas by those frontline managers, as well as a sample of people who are going to attend. Float ideas, test concepts, test some of your script, and listen and watch how people are actually responding. That's very powerful. So it also helps leaders become better at listening and observing. So you can use the town hall as a means by which to start training your executives to become better listeners. That's the first point. Elizabeth, I know you were chomping at the bit.
No, keep going.
Certainly, when we speak to leaders, we've noticed that employee communications folks over time develop a good understanding of their leaders, their skills, their willingness and availability. And sometimes that comes at a cost, right? Late nights, endless revisions, brilliant ideas thrown up at the middle of the night or the last minute. And just as an aside, we have a 90-minute workshop focusing on dealing with resistance from executives and such. Certainly, most inspiring leaders love to share stories, right? At the end of the day, though, they really want to have an impact. So if you've got resistant leaders, provide some alternatives where they will have an impact, alternatives to town halls, particularly if it reduces their stressors. And having said that, they're also like the rest of us, right? They're drawn to do things that are familiar, even if those familiar things sometimes underperform. So that could mean draw elements from the town halls. And we found that having a predictable cadence is an element or a quality that a lot of senior executives appreciate about a town halls. I can put it in my calendar. I can make sure that I can calendarize it. I know what's involved before, during, and after. So even if you just combine those two lessons, and you can overcome some of the resistance and provide meaningful advice by saying, hey, bring in an alternative tool to town halls like Ask Me Anything, and make it regularly scheduled and put it in the calendars. And that alone can help executives see that there are alternatives to town hall.
I would add to that a couple practical things that they can do if they're going to do them anyway. And the first, I think, is understand what you want to do with it, because I think very often it's just this kind of barfing of information with no particular point. And so we always say that you want to use town halls to present information that's not necessarily new, but is strategic, right? So the big strategic stuff, town halls aren't the place to announce, your new acquisition or your brand new products or something. There's better ways to do that. It's not the place to inform people about updates to policies and procedures. And it's not even a particularly effective way to give, the routine updates, which is what most of them are, that turducken of spreadsheets. They're really, really, really good at strategic updates. So the strategy's out there, and your job really as a leader is to get out there and tell everybody how that strategy is going. And I would add to Andrew's point about listening. One thing that also works is flip your agenda. Do your Q&A at the beginning, because the worst part of every town hall is the Q&A, right? So everybody's halfway to the door because it's now run half an hour over and they still have to do their full day's work. The leaders are looking at their watches because they want to get to the airport. And you've got, it takes a while, as nobody asks questions at first. And a good communicator has 2 or 3 planted in the audience, nice softball questions. And finally, somebody gets up the nerve to ask a really good, thoughtful question. And it's like, oh, is that the time? Gotta go. And so, if you flip that agenda and make the first 20 minutes about employees and about listening, to your point, Peter, you're not only listening, you're being seen to be listening, which is, in our view, pretty much as important as the listening itself. And so I think those are some things that leaders can do, if they're going to do a town hall, to make them more effective and to make themselves look more authentic.
And what about the follow-on? So you have the town hall or there is some, a Q&A gathering, and maybe you're not able to address all the questions. And I've seen it where sometimes the questions are submitted through whatever HR portal or, whatever they're using to kind of crowdsource. And you may not be getting to all of those. So have you seen some kind of novel or kind of innovative ways to get at those questions, or organizations, well, I've never really thought about this, or, we need to be transparent on this point because we're seeing this theme emerge where people are really interested in how this is working and we're apparently not providing enough information. Are you seeing that at all? Is that something that comes up?
Sadly, we're not. I mean, I think that, we always say that there's no such thing as survey fatigue, but there is a giant problem with, can I say bullshit? And there's a giant problem with bullshit fatigue, right? So people go to these things, they hear people go, oh yeah, that's a good point, and nothing ever changes. And so I think that certainly the best practice here is when you've done one of these town halls and you are sending the follow-up, which most people don't bother doing. You're saying, here's what we heard and here's what the leadership team has taken away. And then make sure that is where you start your planning for the next town hall. Because people remember that stuff. People remember you said you were going to go look at the diversity policy or the environmental policy. And then there it isn't on the slides 3 months later. And they will remember that. And so, I think that the follow-up is important. And I think, again, this is where your frontline managers are so important. Put that information in their hands because they see their employees every single week. They have team meetings every week or 2. And that's just a wonderful way to put information directly into the context and the brains of the people who are on the ground.
And just want to circle back on an earlier comment that you made about strategy, because I think one of the challenges sometimes is that you have people at all different levels of the organization. So how, sometimes the strategy is going to connect a little bit differently depending on where you are. do you have any recommendations for, how you make sure that everyone's kind of connecting with the strategy and sees that it is in their best interest as being part of the organization to work towards that? So it's really kind of grounded in their own experience, which seems like a challenging thing to do, but I just wonder if you had any insight on that.
Andrew, you want to do that one?
I would say that there is a bit of a halo around town halls. So I want to prevent town halls from being the catch-all of everything. Yeah. And so it's a matter of recognizing that they're part of the mix, getting people involved and engaged and understanding a company's perhaps rapidly evolving strategy is not going to be done through one mechanism. It's going to be done through a host of mechanisms, largely by tapping into credible sources. It's the frontline managers and the credible venues, whether that's going to be email, group meetings, briefings, the Answer Me sessions, surveys. It's not, unfortunately, life is messy in organizations. So it's not a one solution to all. I'm afraid, Peter, it's going to be a whole bunch of things. And the town hall's just one piece of that.
I would add to that, again, it's your frontline managers, right? So strategy works when everybody in the organization understands how their role connects to it. Even, whether you're the receptionist or you're the chief financial officer, you need to have that personal context for it to make any sense at all. And that's something only frontline managers can do, right? I don't know a CEO out there who can connect every role in the organization to the strategy. That's what frontline managers are for. So again, my feeling is, as part of this mix, you've got to enable your frontline managers to just keep reinforcing those messages day in and day out and giving people that very specific individual context.
Exactly. And I would just add, we talk all the time about, and we help our clients use venues like this to build trust. And you build trust by tapping into people who are credible in the eyes of the target audience. Again, the middle managers have that nailed down. So two parts there really is tap into that and also recognize that perhaps executives, well-meaning, inspirational executives may not have the trust that they need in order to get people to understand and buy in, and those middle managers will have that credibility.
For our members, someone that's working, say as a manager within a company, manager of communications, and what advice do you have for them and like how to kind of advocate for this change? They may not have the ear of someone in the C-suite, but what are some things that they can do to change the dynamic? Just curious if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I think part of it is, is to get in front of the habit, right? And just ask why. So when it's, hey, we're doing a town hall, it's really why, what is the outcome? And I think don't be afraid to, I think for any communications channel that gets sort of shoved in your face, just say, well, why are we doing it? And then I would say have an alternative in your back pocket. So if you've got some CEO is saying, well, I just need to get out and be in front of people, which is fantastic. Like I love CEOs who want to get out, but maybe the AMA is the thing, as Andrew said, schedule that, or what we call free range visits. So instead of bringing a big tent and putting on a show, why don't you just put your CEO on a plane and send her out to these places to walk around, to meet and greet, to do little focus sessions, just have lunch with employees, look over their shoulders, ask them about the picture of their kids on their desk and that sort of thing. And even in the virtual world, we can do those things. So I think communicators, you may not have a lot to say about how the C-suite spends its time, but I have found that when you offer an alternative to something, you at least get a bit of consideration for it. So instead of that, try a video. I think one of the great outputs of the pandemic is I think that our executives are finally getting comfortable with video. They're finally getting over, as we all have, looking at ourselves on a screen, for hours a day. So I am actually excited that maybe some of these town halls, these 2-hour marathons of misery, will actually end up being 3 really tight minutes of video bliss for a lot of employees.
And Andrew, did you have anything to add? I don't want to leave you out.
Well, I go back again to, we talked about alternatives a couple times. When we think about town halls, again, going back to the purpose, what you're trying to achieve, you don't build trust by carpetbagging employees with gobs of information or make them feel emotionally uncomfortable. You create safe environments. And some of those alternatives can be used for that. And again, going back to the theme that we've talked about a couple times, listening is a great way to reduce some of that anxiety. So posing the questions earlier, using these as information gathering. What's wrong with having a town hall where executives actually learn more than everyone else?
I think that's a great point, because thinking about it as like it's an enormous opportunity to get this feedback loop, right, from all the employees. I mean, that's I would think as an organizational leader, that's gold, because you're able to get a really great pulse on what's going on. So I am kind of one last question, and this is probably a difficult one to answer, is kind of the business case, so, and not just town halls, but like just around engagement and how you measure some of these things and how it will impact the business of the organization. Or if it's a government institution or a nonprofit, let's say, advancing their mission. Anything that you could share about that? I mean, I know that's a tough one. How do you put a business metric on this, or a KPI? But
let me take a couple of kicks at this, and I'm sure Elizabeth would want to jump in as well. First, we actually do a workshop on measuring employee communications and the impact. And largely in the things that we advocate are really identifying those things that are important to an organization. So if getting X number of things out the door is important from your employee communication standpoint, if that's what's important, that's what your supervisors, executives are looking for, maybe you should be looking for metrics that are about project. If they're looking for some sort of activity, X number of people who have seen something, then you look for engagement metrics. But at the end of the day, are you looking for change in sentiment, or are you looking for changes of behavior? So it's really going to come down to, because you build your business case based on the desired outcomes that you want to have. So that's part of it. Now, the easier part is to talk about costs that are involved in pulling together town halls, the amount of time that's involved. And so that's part of that's the investment portion without necessarily the return. So I would say at broad level, first, understand what your costs are when you're pulling together a town hall or any employee communication strategy, but be very precise on what you want that return, what you want the outcomes to be. And then you can put together a model that's based on both the return and the investment. Otherwise, you're just going to work with half the equation.
One of my favorite metrics for town halls is to come up with the median hourly salary and cost of the people in the room. And so for a 200-person town hall, that is a big, big number. And to put that out there and say, okay, this is actually costing you $200,000. You are paying $200,000 for people to sit in that terrible room and listen to you. Are you getting $200,000 worth of value out of it? So I like to use that one because it's always a scary number. And then I think too, back to Andrew's point, you need to articulate your KPIs up front. And so things like, do you want people to be able to articulate the strategy to a customer or to a new employee when they walk out of the room? That's a demonstrable thing. That's something we can measure. Or, we can ask people, do you know what your role is? Can you connect your role to the strategy? Did you hear the information that was relevant today? So when we put those up and say, like, these are the KPIs that are important that we need you to hit, is this the way to hit those? I think that's one way to make or break the business case, depending on which outcome you want.
And Peter, I would also just remind our listeners that when it comes to town halls per se, that there are always multiple stakeholders, right? We know that there's the senior executives whose measures of success might be, hey, you know what, the room's full, got through all the slides, I'm off the hook until next quarter. You've got the comms team, right, who go, phew, I'm glad we got that through. Everyone survived. And there weren't any technical glitches, and we've got employees, essentially everyone else who's going, hey, great, it's finished on time, and the sound was okay, and man, those muffins were tasty this time around. So recognizing that you've got those at least three distinct stakeholder audiences, and each of them are going to be measuring success differently, that has to be rolled into that discussion about churn.
I think too, assessing the risk at the local level. So I have been on the receiving end of when the global town hall comes to town, and I dreaded it when the global CEO would come into our location, because it was essentially a week and a half of trying to manage the anxiety of the local managers, right? So don't let them see the second floor. And, for goodness sake, hope we don't get a question about this terrible thing that just happened that they don't know about. And there's a lot of anxiety around at these local levels, or even if you're doing town halls with multiple departments in the same location, right? There's a lot of feeling of risk and vulnerability from the managers and up in those places. So I would add to Andrew's 3 stakeholders, those people, right? Are they coming in thinking, oh, please don't ask that question? Or are they coming in thinking, great, I'm going to know how to articulate this strategy to my team afterwards? So I think that's another important thing to understand.
That's great. Thank you. I just have one last question for you, something we asked everyone on the podcast, and that is, what gets you up in the morning? So we do this because you often hear the question, what keeps you up at night? But, it seems a little negative. So what gets you up in the morning, Elizabeth and Andrew?
Well, for me, I think it's this, I have this real sense of urgency right now because I think we have a closing window for communicators to hit the reset button a bunch of times, right? So we had 16 months of basically holding our breath, treading water, and cranking out very tactical communications. And I think that we have this little window, maybe between now and the end of the year, where we can go back to our organizations and say, okay, here's what we learned. Here's new ways for us to communicate. Here's new channels that we found. And to maybe break some of these nasty habits or make a substantial difference. Like, I think communicators were the absolute epicenter for so much of what went on in organizations. And so I know they're exhausted and they just want to go home. But I would say, so what gets me up is this sense of urgency I have to get out to communicators and go, start making your plans, start cashing in on this crisis, get your budgets improved, get your training improved, work your way further up the food chain in terms of your influence, right? Don't let them send you back to being some side desk project in marketing or HR. You earned your way to the table during this crisis. So dig in and stay there and figure this out, because I think we just have the best opportunity to demonstrate the value of communication in organizations.
It would be a cop-out for me just to say, me too, right? I can't do that. So, but there is some similarity. I get up every morning wanting to help those overworked, underappreciated employee comms folks to sort of come out of the corners and be recognized for who and what they are. And that's, you've got talented listeners with a pulse on the culture. They're catalysts for change, and I would argue key enablers of innovation. And we want to help them become even more successful.
That's great. Well, thank you both so much for speaking with me. And I encourage everyone to view the recording of the presentation at World Conference. So we'll have some information, again, that we're sending out to all members on that. There should have already been a communication, but really great information and great presentation. And Andrew and Elizabeth, thanks so much for speaking with me.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having us. It's quite an honor.
Thank you so much.
Again, thanks to Elizabeth and Andrew for speaking with me. Really interesting perspective. I learned a lot. For those who were not able to attend the World Conference or weren't able to make their session, attend the session, you can access the recordings by going to wc.iabc.com. And thanks again to Elizabeth and Andrew, and thank you for listening.